I took the lighthouse keeper job for the solitude. After years of city chaos, the idea of nights alone on the stormy coastline seemed like salvation. The lighthouse stood tall on the jagged cliffs, its beacon slicing through the mist. Locals called it Wraith's Watch, whispering about its cursed history, but I dismissed their warnings as superstitious drivel. A paycheck was a paycheck, and isolation sounded ideal. The first week passed without incident. Waves crashed relentlessly against the rocks, and the light spun its rhythm through the fog. The monotony was comforting until I noticed the movements. At first, I thought it was just seals basking on the exposed rocks during low tide, but through the binoculars, I realized they were people. Dozens of them dressed in ragged clothing, standing eerily still. Their faces were turned towards the lighthouse, eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. I told myself it was a trick of the mist and my sleep-deprived imagination, but the pattern repeated every night. The tide would recede, revealing the jagged shoreline, and there they'd be, silent figures swaying in the windless dark. I never saw them arrive or leave. They were just there. My curiosity was a slow drip, but fear outweighed it. I stayed inside, locking the door after sunset and keeping the radio close. Then came the woman. The storm that night was fierce, howling winds rattling the lighthouse windows. I just finished adjusting the beacon when I heard frantic banging at the door. Heart pounding, I opened to find a wild-eyed woman, drenched and shivering, clutching a dark object in her trembling hands. "Please," she gasped. "They need a key holder." Before I could ask what she meant, she thrust the object into my hands. It was cold and unnervingly heavy, a twisted, metallic shape that seemed to hum faintly, as if alive. Her eyes locked on mine, and for a fleeting moment, I felt as though she was peering through me, into something deeper. Without another word, she bolted into the storm, disappearing into the blackness. I stood in the doorway, the artifact weighing down my palm, an unsettling unease clawing at my gut. A voice in the back of my head urged me to throw it into the sea, but instead, I brought it inside and placed it on the table. The next few hours were a blur of restless pacing and staring at the artifact. It had an otherworldly design, spiraling grooves and strange symbols etched into its surface. It seemed to pulse faintly in the lantern light, as if it had its own heartbeat. The knock came at midnight. It wasn't frantic this time. It was slow, deliberate, like someone who knew I couldn't ignore it. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I opened the door. A man stood there, or at least something resembling one. He was soaking wet, seawater dripping from his tattered clothes, yet his eyes glowed faintly, an unnatural blue-green that sent chills down my spine. "You have it," he said in a rasping voice, water bubbling at the corners of his mouth. "Give it to me?" I slammed the door in his face. His furious pounding shook the hinges, but I wedged a chair under the handle and retreated up the stairs to the beacon room. My heart raced as I clutched the artifact, its cold surface searing into my skin. The banging stopped, replaced by a low, guttural chant that echoed through the walls. Looking out the window, my blood ran cold. The figures on the rocks were moving now, forming a circle, their hands raised the sky. And rising from the waves was something colossal, a shape that defied logic, tentacles writhing in eyes that glowed like distant stars. I turned to flee, but the man was already inside, his face contorted, splitting grotesquely to reveal gills along his neck. His voice was a hiss, guttural and inhuman. "You are the key holder now." He lunged, but I stumbled backward, the artifact slipping from my grasp. It hit the floor with a deafening clang, and the room tilted as an unnatural force surged through me. The world dissolved into blinding light, my scream swallowed by the roar of the ocean. When I woke, I was on the rocks, surrounded by the cult. Their faces were twisted masks of reverence, their chants vibrating through my very bones. The artifact was no longer my hand. It was in me, fused in my chest like a grotesque parasite. My veins glowed faintly, the same eerie blue-green as the cult's eyes. The ritual was almost complete. The sea god rose higher, its massive form blotting out the stars. I could feel its presence in my mind, an ancient, malevolent force far beyond human comprehension. The cult had used me as the final piece in their horrific ceremony. I tried to resist, but my body no longer obeyed me. I was bound to the god's will, a pawn in its eternal game. As its tentacles reached out, enveloping the cult in a dark embrace, I realized my fate was sealed. I wasn't just a witness. I was part of the ritual, the key to its completion. Now, I am no longer Martin. I am something else, tethered to the lighthouse and the creature that dwells beneath the waves. The beacon still spins, but its light no longer guides ships. It summons them, and I wait, knowing that one day someone will come, drawn by the light, and the cycle will begin again. They said the Starlight Theater had its final curtain call in 1929, but something about the place always called to me. As an aspiring actor, I couldn't resist its allure. I'd seen photos of its golden age, velvet seats, a chandelier like 1,000 falling stars, and a stage that turned mere mortals into legends. Now, it was a husk, boarded up and forgotten, but I needed a quiet spot to rehearse, and something about performing on that stage, even in ruins, seemed fitting. The night I snuck in, the air smelled of mildew and thyme, heavy and suffocating. My flashlight beam caught remnants of its former grandeur, ornate carvings on the balcony, faded murals of Greek muses on the ceiling, and dusty, tattered curtains framing the stage. I felt both a chill and a thrill. This was where stars were born. Maybe, just maybe it could birth one more. As I made my way to the stage, my steps echoed in the cavernous room. That's when I heard them, footsteps, deliberate and slow, but not my own. I froze, heart pounding. "Hello?" My voice ricocheted off the walls. No answer. I scanned the darkness, but saw no one. Just shadows stretching and shifting as if they had lives of their own. Brushing it off as my imagination, I climbed onto the stage, determined to make the most of this chance. After all, actors thrive in discomfort, right? I stood center stage and began reciting my monologue. My voice faltered at first, but as I continued, something about the space seemed to amplify me. The acoustics were uncanny, carrying my words to every corner of the room. It felt like I was performing for an invisible audience. Bravo. The voice came from the darkness, smooth and rich, like honey laced with poison. I spun around to see a man leaning casually against the orchestra pit. He was dressed like he'd stepped out of the theater's heyday. Tailored suit, polished shoes, and a fedora tipped low. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He smirked. "A patron of the arts. You're quite good, you know. Raw, but good." His presence was unnerving, but his words ignited something in me. Praise was a rare commodity for an actor struggling to get noticed. "Thanks, I guess. Look, if you're security or something, I'll leave." "Security?" He chuckled, low and deep. "No, Liam, I'm here to offer you the role of a lifetime." My blood ran cold. "How do you know my name?" He stepped closer, and though his movements were unhurried, there was something predatory about them. "I know talent when I see it. And you, my boy, have it. The kind that deserves to shine. Forever." The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. I opened my mouth to respond, but he was gone. Just like that. One moment there, the next, shadows. I shook it off, chalking it up to my nerves or some overzealous theater buff playing a prank. I turned back to my rehearsal, trying to ignore the growing unease. That's when I noticed the journal. It was on the edge of the stage, leather-bound and cracked with age. Curious, I picked it up and flipped through the pages. The entries were dated from the theater's heyday, written in a scrawling hand. What I read made my stomach churn. The journal belonged to someone named Eleanor Chase, a starlet who performed at the Starlight in the 1920s. Her entries started innocently enough, musings about her roles and ambitions, but soon darkened. She wrote of secret meetings held in the theater's depths, of occult-worshipping fame as a deity, and of rituals involving blood, sacrifices to secure eternal stardom. Performers were chosen, lured by the promise of immortality, and their lives were the price. I slammed the journal shut, heart racing. Suddenly, the room felt colder. I heard whispers, soft at first, then growing louder, overlapping, desperate. The air grew thick, pressing against my chest. I turned to leave, but the man was back, standing in the aisle, his smile now a grim slash across his face. "Leaving so soon?" he asked. "What do you want from me?" I yelled. His expression darkened. "You, Liam, you're the final star we need. The final offering." The shadows around him deepened, coalescing into humanoid forms with empty, hollow eyes. I stumbled back onto the stage, but it offered no safety. They surrounded me, their murmurs filling my ears with promises of fame, of adoration, of a legacy that would never fade. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't real." "Real enough," the man said, stepping closer. "The starlight has given us its power for a century. All it asks is one more name on the ledger. Yours." They closed in, and I felt the pull of their words, the seductive weight of their promises. But then I remembered Eleanor's journal. She had mentioned the spotlight, a cursed artifact that channeled the theater's dark power. Destroying it would break the ritual. Summoning every ounce of courage, I sprinted toward the spotlight, perched high above the stage. The shadows clawed at me, their whispers turning to shrieks, but I reached it, grabbing the heavy stand. With a primal scream, I hurled it down, shattering the glass and plunging the room into darkness. The scream ceased, the shadows dissolved, and when the emergency lights flickered on, the man was gone. I left the theater that night, vowing never to return. But the starlight wasn't done with me. Every time I performed afterward, I felt its presence, whispers in the wings, cold hands on my shoulder. Fame still tempts me, but I stay in the shadows now, haunted by the truth. The starlight still waits, and it still hungers.